good. Like, there's so many things that I'm like, nope, I already have something, or I'm in the bowl. So, happy to be here.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I look forward to feedback and comments and questions.
Good Good afternoon. Who's on? Good afternoon. Nope.
Hello. Thank you for being here.
For those online, just hold on a second.
Really?
Katie
Awesome.
Dahl lives in Door County.
Okay. Oh, awesome. Good for her.
You can
How does your last name spelled?
DAHL.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Ah, there it is. Yay. The magic of technology. Welcome, everyone. I'm Connie Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, and I'm really glad that you are here today, whether you are in the room or online. Intersections is really about civil dialogue on important issues that impact our communities. And so we like to bring different topics and different speakers to the group and have great conversation. It is our practice that the presenter will talk for a while, and then we'll open it up to questions after that. And I'll bring the microphone around to you. So you just have to raise your hand and get my attention rather than the speaker's attention. And I'll bring that microphone to you when you're next in line. So we are delighted to have Mary Cohen with us, and she is the Associate Professor of Music Education at the University of Iowa. She researches music making and well-being and is lead author of Music Making in U.S. Prisons, listening to Incarcerated Voices, and that was published in 2022. She founded the International Music and Justice Network, IMAGIN, Caring Communities, researchers from 15 countries who meet monthly and collaborate on projects. From 2009 to 2020, Mary led the Oakdale Community Choir with incarcerated and non-incarcerated participants both. She has over 40 publications in journal articles, book chapters, and conference proceedings. And Mary's going to talk with us about music making that can play in achieving goals of accountability and healing, and in challenging the widespread assumption that prisons and punishment keep society safe. So will you welcome Mary Cohen, please?
Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everyone, for being here live, and the folks that are connecting on YouTube. Thank you as well. As she mentioned, the title is Music Making. Good question. I think it is.
Yep.
Do you hear me coming? Is my volume okay for everyone? I see some heads nodding. Yep. Yes. Just stop me if something is not clear or not loud enough. All right. Music making to build solidarity. Experiences with singing and songwriting in prison context is the title. And if I figure out which button to press, I'll go forward. There it is. So this is what I've planned for our time together. We'll start with a short 3-minute video trailer for a brand new documentary film. It's called The Inside Singers. And I'll tell you the story behind that right before I share that video. By the way, it will be featured twice in Cedar Rapids at the Cedar Rapids Independent Film Festival on Friday, April 5 at 8 p.m. and Saturday, April 6 at 11 a.m. And that's the same weekend I'm leading a retreat at Prairie Woods. Thank you, Jean, for all the facilitation. It's a singing retreat, Friday night, April 5 and Saturday, April 6. So there is still space to sign up if you are available and want to come. I'm co-leading the singing retreat. So we definitely welcome you to come to that. And the film theater, Collins Theater, is just 4 miles from Prairie Woods. So you can actually do both. Saturday Film Fest. I'm going to go through some very depressing prison statistics. That's coming up. Just it's important to understand that. There's several key terms that are very important in this work, and those include desistance, prison industrial complex, abolition, restorative justice, transformative justice, and a fairly new concept called generative justice. And then going into music making in prisons, the Oakdale Community Choir, the Imagine Caring Communities that Connie mentioned, and a new inside-outside songwriting collaboration project that I started last year. So FYI, I don't have this in the presentation, but I thought, like, what are you doing now? I can't get, the Oakdale Prison Choir is, And you'll hear about that in this presentation. But since September of 2023, I've been going in weekly to the Juvenile Detention Center of Lynn County, leading a music group. So that's been a huge learning experience. The youth there are amazing. So before I go any further, I invite you to think about what are you most curious about with this topic? And I'm curious, have any of you ever been inside a prison? Or do you know people who are currently working in the Iowa Department of Corrections or other prisons or incarcerated? Just like level of, we have several, I would say over half of the people here have that kind of a connection. That's really good to know. So the next thing is the video. So as it's getting set up, let me know if I need to push another button on here or if it's gonna go. The man that made this film, his name is Dan Cohen. And Dan lives in Chicago, and he used to create these, he used to do a lot with like true crime documentaries. Then his mother, Amy, decided to join the Oakdale Choir. And he thought, oh dear, is it safe that my mother's going into a prison every week to be in this choir? So he came down from Chicago and went to a concert. The prison is in Coralville, and had the stereotype of prisoner was completely shattered. He said it's the only concert he'd ever been to where the next morning, the first thing he thought about was that concert. So he was able to get permission from a previous prison administration to collect video footage in the spring of 2015 season and created this 30-minute documentary film. And we even have video footage in the film from when the choir began in 2009 and some footage of some of the things that we did during COVID when the outside singers, the choir is made up of people not in prison that sing with people in prison. You'll see that in the video in a second. So he's got the full story and even a song from this Inside Outside songwriting collaboration project that I plan to share if I can get through all my stuff within 30 minutes, because then we'll have time for Q&A. So, and guess what? It won Best Documentary Short at the Cinema on the Bayou Film Fest in January. That was the world premiere. And I got to travel to Louisiana for the conference or the film festival with 2 formerly incarcerated choir members that were featured in the film. So it was very exciting. So do I push a button or does it just go?
This is my mom, and this is me. My mom is part of the community choir, usual in the sense that it's made up of sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses. Unusual in that all practices are held in a medium security prison, and the group is made up of half inmates in green shirts, the inside singers, and half outside volunteers in purple, the outside singers. Here's a sneak peek from the beginning of the film. This is my mom, and this is me. My mom is part of a community choir, usual in the sense that it's made up of sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses. Unusual in that all practices are held in a medium security prison, and the group is made up of half inmates in green shirts, the inside singers, and half outside volunteers in purple, the outside singers. Here's a sneak peek from the beginning of the film.
dominant way of thinking is someone's committed a crime. What did they do? And how should they be punished? But there is a different way to think about conflict. The question would be, what harm has been committed and how can that harm be healed? Looking at who are we now and how can we build beauty and build each other up.
Great. I love how there's a music stand at the front of this room. I wanted to say that. It's really good. And it was very emotional. It's still very emotional for me to watch the video of this project because we never know that we don't have what we have till we don't have it. So moving on to some statistics. Some of you may already be familiar with how many people are locked up in the United States, that there are roughly 1.9 million people incarcerated in the US, 803,000 people on parole, so 2.9 people on probation. We lead the country in how many people are in prison. And if you look closely at the rise to incarceration in the late 70s, that was a time where a woman named Faye Honey Knopp wrote a book called Instead of Prisons, an Abolitionist Handbook, because they realized in the 70s prisons were not solving any problems. They were really causing more problems. Nevertheless, we have risen to mass incarceration, and according to Prison Policy Initiative, 1 in 3 people behind bars is in a jail. Most have not even been tried in court. So nonprofit organizations like the Bail Project that provides funding for people that cannot afford bail, as well as initiatives to change cash bail, are really an important part of what can change the broken, challenging system. And it's not one system, it's very complex. There are 50 or 3,144 distinct criminal legal systems. Notice I used the word legal and not criminal justice system. And each state has its own policies and power structures. Each county has its own stories, problems, and trends, plus the federal system. And John Pfaff has made this argument in a book called Locked In, The True Causes of Mass Incarceration, How to Achieve Real Reform. And beyond federal prisons, multiple agencies and thousands of local facilities confine people for the federal government. I'm going to keep moving just because there's a lot of things to share, and there's a lot of problems also. The racial and ethnic disparities in state and federal prison are extreme. Many people have argued prison is a legacy of slavery because within the prison systems, people are earning pennies on the dollar, and there's a lot of companies that are earning a great deal of money from prison labor. 13th Amendment has not abolished slavery in the context of prisons. And then several companies earn quite a bit of money. Adjusting something? Yeah. This one. Yeah. Better? Okay, thank you. Take 2. Continuing. So the whole issues with the prison industrial complex is complex, and I do have a slide about that soon. The people under U.S. correctional supervision is also extreme. Fergus McNeil, a Scottish criminologist, has argued pervasive punishment, that people are still released from prison, but still dealing with either stigma and or all of the policies. The sex offender registry, for example, there are so many people that struggle to even be able to go into a library because of these really arcane laws that don't create any sense of caring or support for one another. A lot of things that need to change. And then this slide, according to the Prison Policy Initiative, what do victims of violent crimes really want? Only 27% prefer longer prison sentences, while 61% prefer shorter sentences and more time on prevention and rehabilitative programs. 14% prefer investing in prisons and jails, while 82% prefer investing in more programs for at-risk youth and other crime prevention programs. 25% prefer holding people accountable by putting them in prison, while 69% prefer holding people accountable through different options beyond just prison, like Common Justice is one of those examples in New York, a program where Danielle Sarid provides space for restorative justice programming that's victim-centered and racially equitable. 19% think prison helps rehabilitate people. 52% thinks prison, pardon me, I'm going to cough or swallow, one of the two, so it comes out better out of my mouth. Anyway, 52% think prisons make people more likely to commit crimes. So that's victims of crimes. And perhaps you've already thought of this or know this, crime is socially constructed. Behaviors become crimes through a process of social construction. The same behavior may be considered criminal in one society and an act of honor in another society, or in the same society at a different time. We are seeing this a lot with the various laws that are being introduced in our country. Have you heard of a term called dissonance? It's a term that means to desist or stop criminal behavior. And it's a multifaceted process with three interrelated components. Primary desistance is basically becoming older, becoming more mature, and stopping criminal behavior from that sense of aging. And secondary desistance, Sean Marina argues, is about self-identity. So identifying oneself other than criminal. And there are several research studies that have indicated music making is a means toward that. For example, becoming identified as a guitarist or a songwriter or a choir member, broadening. We all have multiple identities, but allowing an identity related to music making, for example. And perhaps the most important one is this concept called tertiary, or the third level. So first level, second level, third level of desistance, which are the social and political processes. So for example, when a person is in prison, I mean, there's the need for our social ability to welcome them back. If we understand crime is a problem against relationships, then we need to have a way of thinking about a communal response that supports people that are released from prison. And there have been several studies that have indicated attitudes toward people in custody are transformed from singing together and or attending a prison choir concert, and other studies with arts programs as well. So I've mentioned this term a couple times. According to the folks at Critical Resistance, they've defined the prison industrial complex as the overlapping interests of government and industry that use surveillance, policing, and imprisonment as solutions to economic, social, and political problems. So it's a complex, very, very complex component of our society. And you've probably heard people use the term abolition. It's used in a lot of different contexts. And one consideration for this concept of abolition is to reduce or eliminate prison systems, and really reflecting on this concept of punishment as a response. To what extent is punishment a response to a conflict? And how does punishment help? So that term is called carceral logics. And that general idea of reducing prisons is decarcerating the number of people behind bars. A simple metaphor for this, and it's kind of gross, I apologize, but if you have a wound in your body and it just keeps digging into it, it's going to not heal, rather than creating a space for healing, which is a different response than punishment, is what I'm trying to get at. Excarceration is replacing prisons with rehabilitative systems. What are the things that will really help people that are dealing with domestic abuse, with different issues of poverty, with different issues of substance abuse as well? The steps to get there are multifold, simple, but can be some of it simple and also complex. And as I mentioned, it's not a new movement. In 1976, the concept of an abolitionist handbook, it's still available online, and that's where they use these terms of decarcerate and excarcerate. If you've ever heard of, if you know Alexis Pauline Gumbs, she makes a very interesting point in this book called Abolition Now, 10 Years of Strategy and Struggle Against the Prison Industrial Complex, originally published in 2008, that long ago. She said, what if abolishing the prison industrial complex is the fruit of our diligent gardening, building, and deepening of a movement to respond to the violence of the state and the violence in our communities with sustainable, transformative love. The idea of healing and sending love and thinking about how we, to what extent are we caring for our communities and ourselves? And how many of you heard of the term restorative justice? When I first moved to Iowa in 2007, it was a very minor number of people that would know that term. Restorative justice is, rather than responding to harm or looking at a conflict and saying who committed the crime and how should they be punished, restorative justice is looking at what harms have been committed and how can those harms be healed. And then transformative justice, that's a concept related to creating systemic change. What are the things in our society that are resulting in people living in poverty, and how can we make major changes so those things are adjusted and changed? And then the gentleman I mentioned earlier with the pervasive punishment slide, Fergus McNeil and friends, have created this concept, generative justice. Fairly new. I've just learned about it last year when I went to my first set of criminology conferences as a music educator. It's a different culture. And it's, Fergus has defined it as the community practices with people impacted by legal systems. And those practices are building solidarity and building positive relationships. So to me, it's that sense of solidarity and to what extent are we doing that kind of work with people who are impacted by the system. That's a picture of Fergus in the center of that image. He's also a musician. And he has a group in Scotland called Distant Voices. So briefly, the research with music making in prisons that it promotes well-being, fosters a positive environment, enables emotional expression and communication, supports the development of positive relationships within and beyond prisons, supports rehabilitation and reintegration, reduces self-harm, develops self-esteem as defined by worthiness and by competence, and inspires activism. And here are 3 different groups. The East Hill Singers out of the Lansing Correctional Facility in Kansas was how I first heard about prison choirs. I was teaching in an elementary school in Kansas City and had friends. My husband and I were in a group called the Festival Singers of Kansas City. Several folks in that choir were involved in the East Hill Singers. And I knew that this choir was made up of people in prison and they sang in the community. The men in that prison leave the prison and join a group of volunteer singers. So there was one Sunday in January of 2002, I was reading the local Kansas City arts section and saw that this choir was performing just a few miles from our home. So I went out of curiosity and was blown away at this idea of people that have been accused of committing crimes singing in unison and in harmony with people from that society. So that's my first introduction. And then in Ohio, Kathy Roma has done several choirs. Hope Through Harmony is not in existence anymore. That's at a women's prison in Dayton, Ohio, but she has another choir that is going. And the Voices of Hope at the Shakopee Women's Prison, directed by Amanda Weber, is still going. So the Oakdale Choir's goals are to build communities of caring, self-care, care among all of the people that we interact with in our lives, and then the broader care. And that continues to be our goal, even though we are not able to go into the prison and sing together. How many of you have heard of the term Ubuntu? Ubuntu, defined by Desmond Tutu, is that my humanity is caught up, inextricably bound in yours. And this is really core to me in my life, and it's been a core part when we had the choir. Everyone in the choir read a little article to get an understanding of Ubuntu. And I'm teaching a class this semester I designed called Peace Building, Singing, and Writing in a Prison Choir. And all the students in my class have pen pals, either with men in the Oakdale Choir or the folks that are from outside of Iowa have pen pals with people in prison from, there are like 4 in Illinois, 1 in Nebraska, and 1 in Minnesota. They're all, and they all are reading about Ubuntu and talking with their pen pals about Ubuntu. Just a few weeks into the Oakdale Choir, one of the inside singers said, being in prison is especially hard for a lot of people because there's so much negativism. I've learned through our practices and meeting people from the outside world that we are human. That kind of distinction for someone who's been institutionalized by living behind bars. The choir began in 2009 with 44 people, 22 inside and 22 outside. And by 2020, our last rehearsal was May 3rd of 2020. We had over 85 people in the choir. So there were a total over those 11 plus years. We had 174 inside singers, 136 outside singers. We had 300 people total, 150 original songs. We've done a lot with songwriting, 25 concerts or events in the prison, the summer months where we did a lot of the summer songwriting creation, and then over 3,000 guests in concerts. Have anybody here been to one of the concerts? But some of you have friends that have sung in the choir. I know that there's some friends with Jay Knight and some friends with Andy Douglas. When Warden Jim McKinney began, fall of 2015, that's when everything changed. This gentleman is the most progressive warden I've ever met in my life. The very first time he became warden, like day 2 of his job, he walked down the halls, sat down at a choir rehearsal. We didn't really know our song very well. It was early in the season, so we shifted to a song we knew better, which was the Irish Blessing with the lyrics, "May the road rise to meet you." The end of that song, Jim said quietly under his breath, "I hope that's how my time is while I am the warden." The following week, he comes again to the rehearsal. Remember, this is way beyond his work hours, and he comes with a woman. Who's with you, Warden McKinney? And it was his wife. He brought his wife to come and connect with us in the choir. He allowed more people. We had over 85 people. He allowed up to 300 people come into the prison for concerts. He collaborated with the president of the University of Iowa to begin a University of Iowa Liberal Arts Beyond Bars credit-bearing program. And we even had the Soweto Gospel Choir come into the prison when they were doing a tour through Iowa and did a musical learning exchange with Maggie Wheeler and Sarah Thompson. And we had a visit to the state capitol with outside singers. And the funny thing about this, so you can see Jim, if you look, I don't know on the screen if I can see it on Zoom, but that's Jim. When he first met me, he's like, "Mary, I don't sing, but every concert, singing is a learned school tool. Everyone can sing." I say that every concert. And he came with us and sang at the Capitol. So yeah, wow is right. Way to go, Jim. Now here's the really sad thing. So there was a lot of things that happened in Iowa prisons. The primary issue was there were 2 people that tried to escape the Anamosa prison in 2021. In their process, they murdered 2 staff. Just incredibly awful that happened. So as a result, the whole Iowa Department of Corrections really stopped a lot of things and created a lot of new rules. So just last March 31st, the same day there were tornadoes that came through Iowa, not too far from my home in Coralville, I received this email from Mike Heinrichsey, who basically says in the email that they've been reviewing what programs they could keep post-COVID to try to figure out what they had staffing for, what was sustainable, what fit their programming mission, and they determined the choir was something they would not be able/willing to allow to restart. So I'm still grieving. I wrote a grief essay about this that I need to figure out where to try to submit somewhere. But look how he ends it. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but wish you all the best." Maybe some of you know people working in the prisons. And anyway, we'll move on to a little bit more back. Some of you do know Andy Douglas. He wrote a book about the Oakdale Choir, his experience called Redemption Songs, A Year in the Life of a Community Prison Choir. And I have a hard copy of the book on that table if you want to take a peek at it. And so, what can we do that will still build these communities of people inside and outside? So I created this inside-outside songwriting collaboration project where one-on-one, an inside songwriter is partnered with an outside songwriter. So far, we've had 18 songwriters from across the US and UK. Those are the outside songwriters partnered one-on-one with 16 different Iowa songwriters. So 3 different songwriters had 2 different partners, if you want to figure out why is it not a one-to-one thing. And 1 outside songwriter had 2 different incarcerated partners. In this partnership, everybody reads about transformative justice and about this concept of Ubuntu. We had 7 original songs shared on Zoom on August 10. And what's so interesting about all these outside songwriters, out of all of them, only 2 had a connection with prisons. One of them did a lot of research about prisons for his doctoral degree, and the other one sang in the choir. But all of those other 16 people were completely new to having a connection with someone in prison. the very first song that was created was prior to the songwriting project. Lindsay Scott, she's actually in Iowa City. If anybody has nothing going on tonight and wants to go to Iowa City, she's leading a group singing event at Public Space 1, and she is amazing. She partnered with Anthony Rod to create a song called Over Under, where she listened to Anthony on the phone playing guitar and used that, and then recorded Anthony talking about what's hard about being in prison. So I think if we can push the right button, the button on the left is just a little bit of the introduction of the song. Will you be able to play that to here? We'll see or not. We didn't do a sound check to see if the audio would come through on this. Do I need to push something on my end, or does it happen on your end? Let's see if I push something. No, but it goes to the next slide. If you just put your cursor over the little gray thing, it won't play. Okay, so you can go and listen to it on Bandcamp and hear the whole song. It's a really powerful song. That's a picture of the Zoom call, the August one, where we were sharing out the song. And some reflections. One of the participants said, "This collaborative songwriting project has given me the gift of connection to the prison system in a way I've never had before. We're all people struggling to navigate challenges with as much acceptance, dignity, and grace as we can muster. It is my belief that creating and sharing music in community is an invaluable resource for setting our hearts free, and that is the responsibility of us all to guard, protect, and foster this deeply human birthright." And then Naomi Davis and Michael Blackwell created a song called Mercy Sown, Mercy Reaped. And this particular song is played at the very end of the Inside Singers documentary. So that film does have this full picture, including the fact that there hasn't been a commutation of a life without parole sentence in Iowa in over a decade. We had 3 different choir members try to get their life sentence commuted unsuccessfully. So this is a powerful song, and the quote at the top was what Naomi shared in an article that came out in the local Iowa City paper. She wrote, "Getting to work with my songwriting partner has been such a meaningful experience for me. I've really appreciated getting to spend some time having in-depth discussions about forgiveness and mercy and how those concepts translate both into restorative justice in the U.S. carceral systems and within U.S. society." By the way, I'm working on a book chapter right now. I've been doing a lot of collaborative writing with people in prison in the last several years. And this chapter includes Michael Blackwell, Naomi Davis, Anthony, Rod, and me. That's 4 of us. All about the experiences of the collaborative songwriting and what does that mean. So that's been very interesting. You've heard briefly mention this Imagine Caring Communities. It's grown to now people from 18 different countries, and we have these monthly meetings. So for example, last November, a gentleman named Mark Katz, who's a professor at University of North Carolina, is collaborating on a book with Aline Braxton, who's on death row in North Carolina. The book they're working on is called Rap and Redemption on Death Row. They were both on the call because Aline was able to call Mark and be there on the Zoom call and talk about their experiences with this book and their work. Aline has a really powerful video called Live from Death Row, because he raps into the phone and then other people have made a song from that music. The other person that was on this call, Malal Alami Talla, leads a hip hop festival in a prison in Dakar, Senegal. So we had a man from Dakar, Senegal, a man in North Carolina on the death row, and Mark Katz and several other people. So it's been a really interesting way to connect globally with people doing work with music in prisons. Dr. Ziegenmeier from Germany has started, and some of her research team in Lübeck, Germany, are doing some work with youth in conflict with the law. And then Rajul Kataria, just in February, he's in Delhi, India, and has a powerful program for arts with youth in conflict with the law. The next one coming up in March will be more of these inside-outside songwriting collaborations, and a gentleman in England sharing some of his research with music in prisons, David Lindsay. So a couple images of the little trip to Lafayette, Louisiana for the film festival with Arnold and Kenneth. A lot of fun. And then that's coming up. So put it on your calendars. I'll stop here so there's plenty of time for Q&A. I have a couple other slides, but this is really the main thing I wanted to make sure we ended with, that you have a chance if you're available. This film is not distributed anywhere yet, but Dan, the filmmaker, is hoping that someone will pick it up for distribution. So, and just a simple little takeaway before the Q&A, if there's one thing all of us could do is to use people-centered language. When we're talking about people in prison, to use the words like people in custody, rather than offender or felon or prisoner or even inmate. A person in custody or an incarcerated individual, a formally incarcerated individual.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Mary. If you have questions, absolutely. If you have questions, if you'll raise your hand, I'll bring the microphone to you and then catch my eye to be the next person. If you're online, go ahead and put your question in the chat and we will get to those as well.
I think we have a couple people from the choir on the chat too.
Yeah, well, thank you. My name is Bev, and my question is, one of your early slides, the statistics slides, you were showing that rise in the late 70s, and then, but it seemed to be starting to come down. Is this something we should be hopeful about?
No, no. I mean, there was some coming down during COVID, but it's definitely come back up again. And it's the fact that we have this lifetime issue. I mean, we have so many issues. We still have the death penalty. The only country in the U.S. that still has a death penalty. I mean, my goodness. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about that the death penalty is society's last assertion that will not forgive. I mean, we can be hopeful. We shouldn't not be hopeful. I don't mean that, but I do mean there is so much work that needs to be done. Like even in the peace building class, we went around the circle on Wednesday. What are some of the key things you've learned in the class? And the students were like, well, if I wasn't in this class, I would have no idea about the humanity behind bars. And that they have friends that hear about the class, that they're writing to someone in prison. They're like, and just the attitudes that need to be shifted.
So until the reorganization of Department of Correction, I was on an advisory board for community corrections.
Okay.
That advisory board now has gone away. But one of the projects we had was called Project Hope. And our goal was to humanize folks in prison and the folks who work with them. And so I'm looking for ways to continue that project. And I'm just wondering, and maybe we can talk more later, but in general, have you had any additional challenges since the Department of Corrections reorganized? How is that going for your understanding? And we'll talk, but if you have any insights about how Project Hope might be able to benefit and support this kind of activity, we should get together.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, gosh, where do I start? I mean, I was trying to even just get into Anamosa to give a book talk in like summer of 2023 would have been last summer because the book came out in November of 22. Couldn't even get in there to just give a talk about the book. I know that former Representative Mary Masher has been in the Oakdale prison for it was a veterans banquet, I think. Was there something else? Okay. So that happened in November, but for Hope, because yeah, it's just been really hard to get in touch. When I get those, I mean, time after time, I had a feeling that the new warden didn't want the choir to restart. So I wrote him in January of 23 and said, well, what about like a songwriting workshop? And he never responded to that message, but he did say he received that email. He did join a Zoom call we had August of 2023 of just some, no, that was earlier than that. It must have been 2020, actually, not 23. 2020. We had some trying to continue some activities and had a Zoom songwriting sharing, but we never got to have a phone call. I don't know, maybe someone else has some direct connection with people in prison.
I'm conscious of the fact that the warden is really the key here. When you showed us Jim, who was fully supportive and even participated, and then, you know, we're sorry to disappoint you, and we've got the other end of it. So Beth Skinner and the folks that are above, I mean, is she still the head of the Department of Corrections?
Yes.
So where does she fall? I mean, do you ever get her ear? Is that something we can do? Can we try to, can we lobby her? And I know she's a political appointee.
Right.
I understand that, but can we do something?
Maybe you can try. I've been to 2 Board of Corrections meetings to give a public comment about, kind of on behalf of volunteers that have not been able to go back in, but that didn't make any difference. But absolutely you can call, you can write. There are people doing some work. Michelle Alfano, who used to work with Midwest Prisoners to Books, she goes into Newton on a regular basis and is working to try to make some changes with some of the laws that, that when people go through the sex offender treatment, they should be able to be out, and there's some delays in people being released, a lot of those kinds of things, and she's trying to make some changes with that. So there are people talking and trying to bring awareness to this, but the power dynamics are thick. And even in the chapter 2 of our book, where we go through historical practices with music in prisons, and we're talking about when outsiders come in and do work with incarcerated individuals throughout a lot of my research. So not looking at programs like singing together, incarcerated individuals singing together for worship. Those things are still happening. There's still music making in prisons, but the bridge of outside to inside is what I've been looking at. And everybody throughout the histories of the US prisons are impacted by the warden and the warden's view of to what extent do they follow a sense of progressive rehabilitation or not. So absolutely talking and bringing these concerns up, and I wish I could figure out a better answer to the question.
I just wanted to add, Beth Skinner also has a background and degree in social work, so you would think that she would be inclined to this, so that might be an angle to kind of mention to her.
I had, quickly funny story. I had a phone call with Beth Skinner in, I think it might have been in, it was 21, May of 21. Anyway, I won't go through the story too, but it's kind of a funny story. But at that time, that was right before the new warden was going to be appointed, and she's like, "Don't worry, Mary, the new warden will be supporting you." What happened was I got pulled over for speeding through a small little part of, a little speed trap, and then I was on the phone with Beth Skinner while I got pulled over, and Beth was like, "I've got one of those tickets also somewhere on my desk." But anyway, she had said that this new warden would be supporting programming, but it never came to fruition.
Thank you for the work that you do. I know it's important. A lot of people need to be convinced of that.
Yeah.
I am a playwright and former actress, and I was a founding member of an organization in Los Angeles called Artists in Prison. And we used to go into prisons and mental institutions, et cetera, and do theater games, improvisation workshops, and create theater pieces with the inmates. One of the things that we discovered was a lot of these people they didn't trust process. They had never started something and ended it and come through a process of trial and error and completed something. So this was a very important issue. And in the beginning, I thought, the warden thought we were just like do-gooder girls and coming in. And, once we had done the first workshop, he was convinced of how wonderful it was. He would look at those guys and see them in an entirely different light and see some of the things they were capable of that he would have had no idea. So I thought at a certain point, this'll, work on recidivism, et cetera, et cetera. Then at a certain point, I realized, what we're doing is providing a couple of hours, several times a week, of a positive experience for these guys. I recently found out that, yes, it does affect recidivism, because when funding was slashed, recidivism went up. And this is statistically proven. And when they start funding again, little by little, recidivism comes down. I have listened to people who have been in prison talk about how important it is to them that people come in.
Right.
So that, that idea of having the outside come in, we were able to sometimes bring people out to perform. It was really,
Nice.
it was really remarkable. We made a film about it called Jump Street. I don't know where it might be found now. One of the things that I'm concerned about is looking at this in terms of the people who have already been incarcerated and looking at people who have started to get in trouble or stuff like that. I have two sons. One is a surgeon, one is a filmmaker. Neither of them has ever been in trouble, but they have both been face down in the dirt from the police. This idea of humanizing people who have been in prison, it also is important to humanize people who have not been in prison. We've got primary school kids going to prison for being kids. And so this, like you said, is very complex, but the complexity of it starts way, way, way before people start getting in trouble. And it affects people's health. I mean, like, you know, you walk around with all that anger, even if you never go to prison. My son, in the filmmaker, he got sat down on the curb with handcuffs behind him for no reason. And then they say, oh, no, never mind, and let him go. This kind of thing is like what the question of what can we do? We can make sure that we are looking at people as human beings like ourselves. I was mistaken one time when we brought people out. I was mistaken for an inmate simply because I was Black. I had to prove that I was not one of the inmates. Where are you going? You know, kind of thing. So that kind of, and the idea of all of these private prisons, businesses need product. The product is bodies. And these court systems, these laws, these, you know, all of these things are created to create product for these businesses. So it's a way, way, way bigger issue. But I did have a question. The question was, have you noticed that recidivism is affected by prison programs? And I'm sorry, I promised I wouldn't talk too much.
That was beautiful. Thank you for everything you said. So important to be aware of biases and to continually clear those out and be curious and not judgmental and think about how can we lift each other up. And as far as recidivism of this program, I haven't done a specific study with the Oakdale Choir yet, but challenges to define what we mean by recidivism. You know, we've got several men in the prison choir who are life without parole. So how would their experience play into this? And how would all the people that have been in the choir that are no longer alive play into this question? I guess you just figure it all out together. But, you know, it's a lot of the different people that I've worked with and the things I've read about studying this have always suggested to not look at recidivism because it's just such a hard to define term, and there's so many other aspects of being involved in a program like a theater program or another arts-based program that have other issues that are beneficial. And the more work that I've done with this is the more that really resonates with what you were talking about, which is changing the broader public's awareness of our common humanity and figuring out ways that we can lift each other up and not be so judgmental and not respond to things from a sense of punishment. But I'm kind of at an interesting place in my own career at the university where I turn in all my paperwork for full professor. So I've no more choir. I've been going to the youth center and just trying to figure out what the next main direction is for my research and other, you know, and also one of my favorite things to do is introduce people to each other. So looking at things like, I had an interesting conversation just 2 days ago, or today's Friday, right, Wednesday, with a man named Damon McCool, who is the research person at the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. They have a museum there, and so they really are trying to do a whole lot of work with research and with you know, educating the public. And they have a music exhibit there called Chorus, where an artist from Portland, Oregon, Jess Perlitz, collected audio recordings of people all across the US in prison singing whatever they wanted, either a song they wrote or another song that they wanted people to hear. There's a whole list of a lot of Oakdale choir members and people from Kathy's choir and other choirs. I'm not exactly answering your questions. I haven't exactly done recidivism research on it yet, but it's like, what is the research question to do with something so complex as this? You know, what really needs to be done? But thank you very much for that. And thank you for work with theater is so powerful. I know about Actors Gang, but I didn't know about the program that you talked about.
Hold on. People can't. I'm sorry. No. Go ahead. Well, people can't hear you online, so.
Oh, the online way.
Yeah.
I was interested that you are working with people in 18 different countries, and I was wondering, how do you connect with them? Did you find that in some of those countries, they already are doing inside-outside art collaboration projects, or did you have to convince them, or how did you connect with them?
Great question. How did we connect? Well, back, it was like January of 2021, a group of 6 of us that all knew each other from this research met every month. And then in June of that year, I increased who all joined, because in December of wait, do I have my year wrong? In December of 2021, that was when Omicron came out, right? So there was a conference, or it was a graduate, like a kind of a graduate seminar in Portugal that I went to that was specifically about music and detentions. So then I invited all the people that were involved in that, and it's just grown where people reach out and say, I'd like to connect. And so as far as outside, inside, I mean, other countries like Norway, for example, you know, they've got 2 years of training for the correctional officers that work there. They really do some careful thinking and rethinking about what's going on in prisons and how can they be more supportive. Let's see. Everyone's so different. You know, folks in Brazil are doing different work with youth, bringing them into the communities, and it's a hard question to answer, but it just grew pretty organically, and it's a great way for people to learn about what else is going on. We have our recordings from the meetings on the Oakdale Choir website, so you can go back and listen and hear Aline Braxton talk, you know, from that November 30th meeting. We're planning to put a YouTube channel together with Rajul's session on that, if I get that done or get help.
My question is, how did you get involved in this? What inspired you to do this?
Great question. So not only the visit to the prison in Kansas, where I saw Elvira Voth, she started the East Hill Singers at age 70 in 1995. And just going and thinking about this and wondering, you know, what logic is there to when we learn by the people we interact with. So what logic is there to have people in prison without some kind of an educational program? So I've always been curious about this. Then also, this is a really deeply personal reason, in that I didn't have this in advance of starting this project, but one time I was listening to the National Public Radio, and there was a young woman talking about how she wanted to become out with her mental health challenges. Her mother didn't want her to, but she really wanted to. And I thought, wow, that takes a lot of courage to share that. And I was diagnosed in my freshman year in college with manic depression, bipolar, and have had the privilege of getting a lot of care and support. And there's more stories to all of that. But in retrospect, I've realized prisons, there's so much need for more mental health care. And there's a really depressing book that argues by Christine Montrose that prisons make people more ill. And so it occurred to me that that's also part of the inspiration, is that we should be finding spaces for healing and not for harm. And I like music making with a deeper function, you know, where people are growing, where people are learning, connecting with each other. I find that more satisfying personally than sound for sound's sake for music making. So, yeah.
I'm the mother of a person who works at Oakdale,
Okay.
has worked there for 10 years. And what she continually finds is Number one, people of color are incarcerated with longer sentences for very minor things that somebody that is Caucasian and has money can get out of. Secondly, that if she treats people like people, she, half the fellas there would have her back when she was kind of in the general population. She figured out that she could go upstairs into the psych ward. And if she played cribbage with a fella that was always combative, he was a pussycat. And so she continues to do that. She's had trouble moving up because she works with people instead of against people who are in prison. And so many of them are there because of mental health or poverty.
We are out of time, so help me to thank Mary Cohen, please. So appreciate your work and your dedication to this and how you engage folks in the work, and grateful for you being here as well. So thank you.
And let me know if you have questions. And I'd welcome you, by the way, I brought some CDs. If you still listen to CDs, we have some CDs that are collections of some of the original songs from like 2010 to 2014. So they're on a table over here with some information about the book and some artwork. So enjoy.
And my understanding is they are at no cost.
They are free. They're just, the only stipulation is to pay it forward, either by educating another person about this topic or paying it forward in a generous, kind way, that, the idea of paying it forward. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary. I am so grateful that you are here and part of this, whether you're online or in the room. Next month, Intersections is always the first Friday of the month. So next month in April, we have a presenter from, and my apologies, I'm not remembering her name at the moment, but she is from the African American Museum and is going to do a presentation on some of their work there. So I invite you to come back. Please do make your reservations. We have a request that we get our lunches from the New Pioneer Co-op, and they always come in these really lovely heavy-duty boxes. It would be helpful if we had a couple of people who would just take those back to the co-op. As you know, Kristen and I travel from Des Moines, and so it's always good to have partners in Cedar Rapids to do different pieces. Charles goes to get the lunches, and we of course have this amazing team from the church that helps here. So if you are willing to be part of this work and just take the boxes back to the co-op, you can take them back if you go shopping there or whatever. That would be really useful to us.
And we just want to invite you to bring your glasses over here to the table. We'll recycle your boxes and compost whatever's left in your meal. So thank you all.
We are so grateful for the partnership with the church here and all of their green work. So we are glad to support that. Thank you for being part of Intersections, and we will see you next time.